There's not that many games that capture World War I feeling, and especially the feeling of trench warfare, or in this case, trench horror. And the reason for that is that World War I is less popular. But in recent years, a lot of people are looking back on World War I. It seems like how many people see World War II. Now World War I is finally gaining the attention, and many people are looking at it and seeing the horrors of war. Especially for that War II, but it is a stark difference between World War I and World War II, as both of the world wars had a different impact on the soldiers. And more specifically, for this video, I'm mainly going to talk about trench horror, which in return for the game I'm talking about is Amnesia the Bunker. It's a different game, Battlefield 1. I think that one really captures all of World War I, but doesn't really capture that trench horror really well. For Battlefield 1, it doesn't really use trenches, that's to advantage, it's more run and gun, but still captures the feeling of World War I. But that will be a future video later on, and a really big video too. For Amnesia the Bunker, it takes place on the Western Front, as you play as a French soldier, in the middle of World War I, as it takes place in 1916. For today's video, you see in the title and in the thumbnail, I'll be talking about how Amnesia the Bunker captures a sense of trench horror and a sense of claustrophobia. But before I get into the video, I want to say two things before. I came up with this video idea from a suggestion from a comment in my War.War video. The person suggested Amnesia the Bunker captures the same feeling of horror from World War I. For me, I think it captures more the trench horror. No clue if the guy's still here, but I'm gonna thank him for suggesting this game. To do that, I would encourage you guys to suggest other games too, so I could look at them too, and I'll probably do a video on them too. Or if not, probably future stream, or both. For the second part, in my Black Ops 2 video, I started a sub goal. The sub goal was to hit 5k. So when I hit that mark, I'm gonna do a Q&A stream. So it will be my first stream for this channel. Well, I think I want to hit it around towards the end of August, so practically in 2 months. I would prefer if I hit it earlier. Right now I'm sitting at 2k subscribers, so I would appreciate any new viewers or any returning viewers who subscribe right now, and to check out my other stuff too. But with that out of the way, let's go back into the video. Well, before we get into Amnesia the Bunker, I want to briefly talk about the trench system. So we're going to have a little historical context to this. The trench system was mainly used in a lot of wars, but it is mostly iconic for World War I, as was the whole basis of its thing, as it was basically trench warfare. But mostly on the Western Front. On the Eastern Front, it's a different side of story, but we're not going to be talking about the Eastern Front. We're mostly going to be talking about the Western Front, since Amnesia the Bunker takes place on the Western Front for the French side. Now for the system, each country had a different way of doing it. In some ways they were all similar, as there were just gigantic lines across the battlefield. Most had barbed wire and sandbags too, and in the inside of the trenches, everything seemed very close together, as there was not a lot of much movement that you could do. And you can see this in these photos as they're colorized. Then again, this depends on what type of trench it is, what country it is, and what region they were in. But again, we're mostly focusing on the Western Front on the French side. For each trench, each had a different type of conditions to it, and it mainly impacted the soldier, as the conditions for each trench were harsh. So some trenches had similar conditions to all of them. One of the main conditions you could get was a disease, as it's called trench foot. There was other diseases that ran rampant too, but trench foot was the main thing, as it was mostly talked about. In these trenches, there was a lot of mud, so some of the soldiers would be stuck in the mud with all the water being around them, and they would get trench foot. They would get trench foot because they had to be idle, standing still, looking over across the trench to see if the other enemy was going to advance or not. As for the trench warfare, it was mostly stalemates. There were just barely any movement of going up across these trenches. Trench foot ran rampant through most of the trenches during the war. But that's not the worst part. Remember when I said that these areas are really constricted? Well, it really didn't help the soldiers' mindset. Other things too, as sometimes famine ran through these trenches too. And there was a lot of rats too in these trenches, which spread more disease and caused more misery to the soldiers. But that was not one of the big things that mainly impacted the soldiers' mindset, or even their physical health at all too. As this was a war, so the trenches kept getting shelled by artillery, in an attempt to wear down the enemy, and most of the soldiers died from the artillery strikes. Sometimes it was constant shelling too. These conditions really impacted the soldier's mind. But in the middle of the trenches between a different trench and another trench system was the worst areas in human history, as this area was devoid of life and was completely empty. And that area is called No Man's Land. An area between the trenches, devoid of life, filled with a bunch of holes, a lot of mud, and a lot of dead bodies. And this area represented the massive amount of damage that World War I did to the land. No Man's Land was a stark difference between the trenches, as No Man's Land was an open space, but you were most likely to die in this open space too. On either side they had a clear view of you, and well, they could gun you down easily. No Man's Land was common for all trenches. For the many soldiers, this was a common sight. Many tried not to go into No Man's Land, but they were forced to because in order to charge into another trench, to move up the line. Though there was a ton of casualties while crossing into No Man's Land. This was the area that most soldiers died in. Also too, for World War I, it was mostly stalemates for the beginning parts of the war and even towards the end. So new technologies were invented to break these stalemates, like the tanks and also gas, as they used them for gas attacks using chlorine gas or mustard gas. Now both sides used gas attacks on each other. Gas attacks were mostly prevalent in World War I and were mostly seen during this war. Tanks did break some stalemates, but this was the beginning of tanks, so there was not that many. Just wanted to point those two out because they were important for World War 1, as Amnesia the Bunker doesn't really use that much of gas attacks or even tanks at all. As the gas, there's only a little bit parts of it. From all of these and the terrible conditions, many soldiers develop shell shock. Now today we know what shell shock is. It's a form of PTSD, or a type. Because back in the day, they didn't know what PTSD was, so they just referred it to shell shock. There was different types as they just referred it to combat stress or that. But in today's age, now we know more information that it's considered to be a form of PTSD. Again, like with the other one, I just wanted to get out there to put more information of how the soldiers went through during World War 1. And so with that little context out of the way, I wanted to point out that Amnesia the Bunker captures the feeling of the trench horror, of the feeling of claustrophobia, and while being constricted. I know Amnesia the Bunker is not really a historical game, it's just using World War 1 as a basis for the setting. And I know there's a monster that's chasing you around, but I'm going to talk about the other stuff that makes it more feeling of the World War 1 trench horror. And so now we'll be talking about some of the elements in the gameplay that gives you this sense of trench horror. Now, as the game starts, immediately thrown into the battle. We are rushing into a trench, get some cover, and the game already puts us in the sense of this trench horror for a little bit. Even though it's a small intro, we're already put into the feeling of being claustrophobic and feeling constricted. The pathways are very narrow, as it is pretty normal for every trench system as it has a very narrow opening. There's hardly any leg room or even room to breathe, but we have to follow along the trench line as we're being attacked by the Germans, and that's where we ran into cover into the trench. So there's a German offensive to us as we're playing as a French, as we're a French soldier. In this intro, we're basically showing the basics of the gameplay for Amnesia the Bunker, as this is the first time in the Amnesia series that you can have a gun. And also too, Amnesia the Bunker does something similar to a little bit of survival horror, is that you're given a limited amount of bullets. But as we press forward, we see some dead bodies too, some are French and I think some are German. And also too, the weather thing even adds onto the trench as it's raining. And it gives a flair to the sense of World War 1 since the rain causes the mud and well, we're practically walking around in it. I did say in the earlier part that we're in the middle of a German offensive. As in the background we can see German soldiers running around, and even one section they ambush us and try to shoot us. Now you're given the option to shoot them back, but my aim's terrible here so I wasn't able to kill one. But once you make it safely under them, the rest of your French comrades kill the rest of the Germans. But as we make it through, the battle still rages on. And we get to the point where Germans throw gas into our trench. The thing is, we don't have a gas mask, so your character almost dies. Good thing you're rescued by your squad mate, so in turn you survive the battle. And then so after we survive the battle, it does a little jump cut. As now we're basically in no man's land. And to me, I know some people might think I'm done, but I think this was the most scariest part in the game. No, there's no monsters here, I just find it more scary to just be in no man's land. Because everything's so devoid of life, and there's practically no living thing here. And it's just us as we see the craters and a lot of dead trees. But the reason we are in no man's land is we have to rescue somebody. As we're not doing anything offensive, we're just by ourselves going to look for someone else. But still, when I played this section, I was feeling on edge, and this was when I played for the first time, as the recording you're seeing right now is my second playthrough of the game. For my first time, I was really on edge. It probably had to do because I know the things what happens in No Man's Land, and well, we're not most likely to survive in No Man's Land. Also too, the music in this section is really good. You might not hear it because I'm using gameplay footage and I'm not using the audio as I mute it, but I'm going to use it in the background of this video. I'm using some soundtracks from Amnesia the Bunker inside the background of this video. Anyways, as we continue on, we see a bunch of dead bodies too along the way in No Man's Land. But we see one massive crater. When I first played this, I thought this was a massive crater from an artillery shell, but it's not. It's from something else. But there's a flare down here, and there's someone inside there too. And then so we head down and go rescue this person, as this person is one of our squad mates that helped us with the gas attack. And our squad mate is really injured that he can't move his legs. But we give him water as this crater has a little puddle inside of it. But I'm not mainly talking about Amnesia the Bunker, I'm more talking about the feeling of the game. But this moment is important. But I'm not going to spoil the game, I just want you guys to experience it on your own. But anyways, we have to get our squad mate out of the hole, and we do it. We don't know how, because the crater looks big enough for us not to even crawl inside of it. Well, it looks like it seems it will take time to get out of this crater. But as we carry our squad mate back to our own trench system, we get spotted by the Germans as a flare goes off. So the Germans try to kill us, but in the process we get hit by a stray artillery shell. Or I think a grenade. Not sure what it is, but it was something explosive and it knocked us out. And so concludes the intro for Amnesia the Bunker. As later on, we awake in our own bunker, the French bunker, in our own trench system. But something is wrong. As soon as we wake up, we're not even greeted by our squad mates, and it's really quiet inside the bunker. The thing is, the power's still on, and where's everyone else? So we get out of our medical area. We see that some hallways are closed off by rubble, and there's still no one around us. And it's eerily quiet. But as we look around in one of the supply closets, we find a flashlight. And this is one of our main sources of light for this game. For this flashlight, you have to wind it up and it makes a lot of noise. This is for gameplay reasons because there was other types of flashlights back in the day, like almost similar to the miners' headlamps they had back in the day. But they put this noisy flashlight just for gameplay because the monster in this game picks up on some of the noises you make and will try to find you. so you have to be mostly quiet. But even though we try to find someone, it still gives you the sense of claustrophobic from the beginning of the intro. There's hardly any room to move around as it feels very constricted. It gives you a little bit sense of the trench feeling even though we're in a bunker. As you remember, trench systems are very vast and expansive, and this area gives off that feeling too. Even too, when you get into the mess hall, it doesn't really look that inviting and it still feels constricted, even though it's slightly more open than the other hallways and the other rooms too. Also too, as you look around, there's gigantic holes. When I first played this, I thought these were rat holes, but these holes are for the monster. But still, when I first played through, I thought these were rat holes because rats were very prevalent during the trench system. Sometimes these rats were really big. I don't think they were that big as one of this big hole too. But as you find a blood trail, you finally found someone. Another soldier, but he's really injured. What caused his injuries was not a German, but the monster inside the bunker. He tells us that he's the only survivor here and that one of the officers blew up the bunker, entrapping everyone inside the bunker with the monster and with the rest of the soldiers. Everyone else is dead except for us and him. And then so he gives you a gun, as he requests you to kill him. He doesn't want to be mauled by the monster, and he just wants to go out simple with just a bullet. But there's bullets in the pantry, so you go and retrieve them. But as you retrieve them, he gets taken out by the monster, as you don't have enough time in order to kill him. And so begins the game fully. For this video, we're not going to be talking about the monster, as there was no monsters like this in World War I. But I guess you can correlate too that there was myths going around in the trenches that probably could envision a monster similar to this, but that's mostly passed down stories and probably not even recorded at all. And another thing too is I guess you could correlate too that there's something hunting you down inside the trench, because these trenches are small and then the enemies will come over and will try to kill you. Most of the time these trenches were narrow passages, so you were most likely to be hunted down by an enemy that got inside the trench. I feel like with those two things, they don't really go really well with the monster, and well, I just wanted to put those two things out just to clarify that I'm not mostly going to be talking about the monster, I'm mostly going to be talking about the environment. Anyways, the monster is the one that created these holes and he hides in these holes. So if you make too much noise, he's going to come out of these holes. So we have to find a way to get out of this bunker so we don't get killed by this monster. But in the process, the power goes out, and we are in complete darkness inside this bunker. So this was typically normal, that power will go out inside these trenches. Sometimes the generators will go out inside these trenches due to the lack of fuel due to not enough supply, or sometimes the artillery barrages will knock out the generator for a couple of minutes or a couple of hours. This little thing I think adds on to the trench horror. Most of the time this is pretty common in the trenches that the power will go out and everyone had to wait for the generator to be restarted. Especially too even for the big bunkers. And even to some of the areas that are caved in, but this was probably due to the officer using the dynamite to close the bunker so the monster wouldn't escape. And while it caused a chain reaction, probably some areas got caved in due to the sheer amount of dynamite that was used. Once again, these cave-ins were pretty normal in the trenches. Due to the artillery barrages that it would knock out some of the wood supports and will cave in some of the soldiers. It even goes for all the trenches too, even aside for the bunker. Even though it's supported by concrete, it still caves in no matter what, especially from the artillery barrages. And I like how when you play it throughout the game, that sometimes you could hear some of the artillery barrages hit the bunker and it shakes the bunker whole. Sometimes it happens, and I like this little detail because it shows that there's a war still going on the outside. Once again, you guys might call me dumb because I'd rather be locked in here inside with the monster than go outside fight in the battlefield. I don't know why, I just find the outside of the whole war going in the background more scary than the actual monster that's trying to hunt us down inside the bunker. But in order to escape this bunker, we have to find dynamite and of course the switch for the handle. And then so we have to use our wits in order to stop the monster, as the monster cannot be killed. You can shoot at it, but it will just run away. But in a couple of moments it will come right back at you and will try to kill you, no matter what. We can use our gun or grenades in order to stall the monster, but still in the end he will still try to follow us and kill us. But we can try not to make so much noise. And of course, like I said, that this game follows the trench horror really well. Once we go more inside deeper into the bunker, it still feels more constricted. There's hardly any room to run, and even too when the monster comes out and tries to chase you, there's only one narrow pathway that you can run. Sometimes the monster can catch up to you. And it's not just one area that's super constricted, it's all around the whole bunker. Each hallway, even the mess hall, the living quarters, the armory, the arsenal, everything gives you more of a sense of the claustrophobic feeling. I really like how the game really shines in this too. It does it really well. Like I said, this was the whole point of the thing. It gives you that sense of the trench horror. You're completely constricted and there's no hardly any leg room to move around. Well, it's especially more scary if you're in the dark too. A good thing you could turn on the power by putting fuel into the generator and you have the lights turned on. Still, you still have the feeling of being constricted no matter what you do. I think this claustrophobic feeling gives you this sense of hopelessness. You're very limited to what you can do. While having the monster here doesn't really help that too, because you can't really kill it, it just only goes away when you shoot it and bother it. Also too, once we're traveling around, this bunker feels like a maze. At least there's maps around the map that you can get your sense of direction around here, but still it feels very like maze-like, as some of the areas look too similar. And what else doesn't really help with that is that some of the areas are restricted, as some areas are locked or some areas are blocked by these giant rats. You can find ways to block the rats as you use meat and you could distract them, or you could plug up the holes. Forgot to mention one thing. As you go through the narrow hallways, you have to be careful and watch out for these traps, as they are tripwire traps. Well, these traps are pretty common in trenches, as whenever the enemy crosses over and goes inside the trench, well, they're most likely gonna die to these traps, as well they were not expecting it. But these traps have grenades, flares that will set them on fire, and gas. We have to be careful where we step on. But as we almost go through this maze-like trench system, we find a lot of dead bodies along the way. And of course, all these dead people are killed by the monster. But then again, this is pretty normal for trench systems because sometimes there will be dead bodies and well, they would just leave them there and will take some time to get them out. But as we go through the bunker, we find things that we needed to in order to escape the bunker, like the dynamite and the handle. But there's one area that really sells off the trench horror. As in this one section, once you go up into the pillbox, as there's a ladder there, you find a dead French soldier. But if you stand up, you get shot by a sniper. Well, luckily he missed. As we look at the French soldier, there's a bullet wound to his head. So this guy died to a sniper. And this was pretty common in the trenches. Because most of the time, some of the soldiers would poke their head out and will get shot in the head. And that's why most of the time you get dug down inside these trenches, as sometimes a sniper would just pick you off easily. This would happen to this French soldier too. And could have almost happened to us too, since we stand up and well, we're in the clear sight of him, but we can't see him at all. But good thing he's not really a good shot, as he misses us. I think this little section really adds on to the trench horror, which makes it a little bit more realistic into the trench system of how soldiers felt during the war. As well, they were under constant threat no matter what, with the artillery barrages and also too watching out for snipers trying to kill them. This really adds on to the trench horror. And also too, another little detail I like in this game is that whenever you set off a grenade or shoot your gun, your guy loses his hearing for a little bit. Which makes sense because we're in a closed space and it will sound really loud. And well, we can almost damage our ears practically. Once again, this was pretty common for some of the soldiers during World War I, and adds the horror flair to it. And well, I think there's nothing else I could talk about that really adds on to the trench horror. There's one section that's really flooded, which really makes sense because some areas and trenches will get flooded by mud and water, and well, we'll have to drain that section out. There's another one where there's a German prisoner inside a cell, but those are little small details and I don't think should be talked about fully, so I'm gonna just briefly talk about them. Still, nonetheless, I don't think those are really big factors to the trench horror, as I really think that the constrictedness and well, the feeling of claustrophobia really adds on to this game, being like almost like in a trench. Even though it's a bunker, to me it feels like it gives out the feeling of being inside a trench. And so we're going to be nearing the end of the video. As we get the charging handle and the dynamite, we're able to escape the bunker. We set it off and well, there's a giant hole and we go down it. And so after a little brief scuffle with the monster, either you could kill it or you could let it go out and well, run wild. You beat the game, but you're not really safe because after you crawl out of your own dead comrades, well, you hear a group of German soldiers coming over the hill and well, you're most likely going to be captured. And that's where the game ends off. Now for the closing thoughts. Amnesia the Bunker does a really good job on capturing the trench horror feeling. Gives you the sense of claustrophobia, and well, once you go around the bunker, you feel constricted due to the narrow passages and not really too much big openings. I recommend playing this horror game if you ever get the chance to play it. It's really good despite being really short, and it adds on to the World War I horror feel of the games. I know there's other World War I horror games, but I'm not too sure about them, and this is the only one that I came up and that one of my viewers recommended me to. I'm down either for more World War I horror games. But I think that's enough of me talking for today. This is the end of the video, thank you. And well, don't forget to subscribe. I really want to hit that goal and really want to do that Q&A stream. I'm really excited to do it as it's going to be my first time. So, but it's going to be a little bit scuffed when I do it, so be expecting of that. But anyways, hope you guys have a nice day. This is Mazer Argo signing out.